They were exercising the rights of life and liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So surely, we can reconcile those two things. Surely, America doesn't have to be divided between rural and urban. And Democrat and Republican when it comes to something like this. If you're an American who wants to do something to prevent more families from knowing the immeasurable anguish that these families here have known, then we have to act. Now is the time to get engaged. Now is the time to get involved. Now is the time to push back on fear. And frustration, and misinformation. Now is the time for everybody to make their voices heard from every state house to the corridors of Congress. And I'm asking everyone listening today, find out where your member of Congress stands on this. If they're not part of the 90% of Americans who agree on background checks, then ask them, why not? Why wouldn't you want to make it easier for law enforcement to do their job? Why wouldn't you want to make it harder for a dangerous person to get his or her hands on a gun? What's more important to you, our children, or an A grade from the gun lobby? I've heard Nicole talk about what her life has been like since Dylan was taken from her in December. And one thing she said struck me. She said, every night. I beg for him to come to me in my dreams so that I can see him again. And during the day, I just focus on what I need to do to honor him and make change. Now, if Nicole can summon the courage to do that, how can the rest of us do any less? How can we do any less? If there is even one thing we can do to protect our kids, don't we have an obligation to try? If there is even one step we can take to keep somebody from murdering. Dozens of innocents in the span of minutes, shouldn't we be taking that step? If there is just one thing we can do to keep one father from having to bury his child. Isn't that worth fighting for? I've got to tell you, I've had tough days in the presidency. I've said this before. The day Newtown happened was the toughest day of my presidency. But I've got to tell you, if we don't respond to this, that will be a tough day for me, too. Because we've got to expect more from ourselves, and we've got to expect more from Congress. We've got to believe that every once in a while. We set politics aside and we just do what's right. We've got to believe that. And if you believe that, I'm asking you to stand up. If you believe in the right to bear arms, like I do. But think we should prevent an irresponsible few from inflicting harm, stand up. Stand up. If you believe that the families of Newtown and Aurora and Tucson and Virginia Tech and the thousands of Americans who have been gunned down in the last 4 months deserve a vote, we all have to stand up. If you want the people you send to Washington to have just an iota of the courage that the educators at Sandy Hook showed when danger arrived on their doorstep, then we're all going to have to stand up. And if we do, if we come together and raise our voices together and demand this change together, I'm convinced cooperation and common sense will prevail. We will find sensible, intelligent ways to make this country stronger and safer for our children. So let's do the right thing. Let's do right by our kids. Let's do right by these families. Let's get this done. Connecticut. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Barack Obama. Address on gun violence reduction in Colorado. Delivered April 3, 2013, Denver Police Academy, Denver. Colorado. Well, it is wonderful to be back in Colorado. It is wonderful to be back in Denver. I want to thank Chief White for that introduction. You've got some outstanding elected officials who are here today, and I want to acknowledge them. First of all, a wonderful Governor John Hickenlooper is here. He's here somewhere. I know. Because I just talked to him. There he is. Next to him an outstanding Lieutenant Governor, Joe Garcia. One of the finest young senators in the country, Michael Bennet, is here. Terrific members of the House of Representatives Ed Perlmutter and Diana DeJet. And your own mayor, Michael Hancock, is here. I want to say thank you to the Denver Police for having me here, and more importantly, for the outstanding work that all of you do each and every day to serve your communities and protect your citizens. Before I came out here, I had a chance to sit down with some local law enforcement. Attorney General Holder, and some of the leaders I just mentioned, the wonderful mayor of Aurora who's here. Sportsmen, parents, loved ones of the victims of the shootings in Columbine and Aurora. And we talked about what we can do to protect more of our citizens from gun violence. And from the beginning of this effort, we've wanted law enforcement front and center in shaping. This discussion and the reforms that emerge from it, because law enforcement lives this every day. Law enforcement are the first to see the terrible consequences of any kind of violence. Certainly gun violence, lives lost, families broken, communities that are changed forever. They're very often in the line of fire. The law enforcement knows what works and what doesn't, and so we wanted that experience and that advice. And it was also important for us to hear from mayors like Steve Hogan. Because he's been on the front lines having to deal with these issues under incredibly sad circumstances. And I've come to Denver today in particular because Colorado is proving a model of what's possible. It's now been just over 100 days since the murder of 20 innocent children and 6 brave educators in Newtown. Connecticut, an event that shocked this country and I think galvanized. Parents all across the country to say, we've got to do something more to protect our kids. But consider this, over those 100 days or so, more than 100 times as many Americans have fallen victim to gun violence. More than 2,000 of our fellow citizens, struck down, often because they were just going about their daily round. They weren't doing anything special. Just doing what folks do every day: shopping, going to school. Every day that we wait to do something about it. Even more of our fellow citizens are stolen from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Now, the good news is Colorado has already chosen to do something about it. Look, this is a state that has suffered the tragedy of two of the worst mass shootings. In our history, 14 years ago this month in Columbine, and just last year in Aurora. But this is also a state that treasures its Second Amendment rights, the state of proud hunters and sportsmen. And, by the way, the governor wanted me to remind everybody. That there is outstanding elk hunting here in Colorado. There's a strong tradition of gun ownership that's handed down from generation to generation. And it's part of the fabric of people's lives. And they treat gun ownership with reverence and respect. And so I'm here because I believe there doesn't have to be a conflict in reconciling these realities. There doesn't have to be a conflict between protecting our citizens and protecting our Second Amendment rights. I've got stacks of letters in my office from proud gun owners, whether they're for sport, or protection, or collection, who tell me how deeply they cherish their rights, don't want them infringed upon. But they still want us to do something to stop the epidemic of gun violence. And I appreciate every one of those letters. And I've learned from them. And I think that Colorado has shown that practical progress is possible thanks to the leadership of Governor Hickenlooper and some of the state legislators who are here today. When I was talking to Steve, he mentioned that Aurora is very much a purple city. It's got a majority Republican city council, a majority of the state legislators are Democrat. But they came together understanding that out of this tragedy there had to be something that made sense. And so we've seen enacted tougher background checks that won't infringe on the rights of responsible gun owners. But will help keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Now, in January, just a few weeks after Newtown, I put forward a series of common sense proposals. Along the same lines as what's passed here in Colorado, to reduce gun violence and keep our kids safe. In my State of the Union address, I urged Congress to give these proposals a vote. And, by the way, before we even asked for a vote, I had already signed numerous executive orders doing. What we could administratively to make sure that guns don't fall into the hands of the wrong people. But what I said then is still true, if we're really going to tackle this problem seriously. Then we've got to get Congress to take the next step. And as soon as next week, they will be voting. As soon as next week, every senator will get to vote on whether or not we should require background checks for anyone who wants to purchase a gun. Now, some say, well, we already have background checks. And they're right. Over the past 20 years, those background checks have kept more than 2 million dangerous people from buying a gun. but the loopholes that currently exist in the law have allowed way too many criminals and folks who shouldn't be getting guns. It has allowed them to avoid background checks entirely. That makes it harder for law enforcement to do its job. It's not safe. It's not smart. And by the way, it's not fair to responsible gun owners who are playing by the rules.